My mother stated in front of my autistic son that he should have been aborted. You know, I always thought the hardest part of being a mom to David, especially after his autism diagnosis at age 4, would be teaching him how to navigate our world. I never in a million years imagined that my own mother would try so desperately to push him out of it entirely. Her unthinkable words in that courtroom didn't just shatter my heart, they exposed a betrayal so profound, it truly broke the internet. When David was diagnosed, the world felt like it shifted on its axis. But it wasn't long before my own mother, Patricia, who'd always been controlling, transformed into something truly insidious. She started whispering venomous things, how I was wasting my life on a broken child, how God was punishing me for some unknown sin. Then, 2 years later, my husband was killed in a car accident, leaving me utterly alone with David. And my mother? She saw her chance. The custody battle began when David was 7. Can you believe it? My own mother filed for guardianship, claiming I was an unfit parent incapable of caring for a special needs child. She brought in this notorious lawyer, Winston Blackwood, a man known for tearing families apart. Her petition was a cesspool of outright lies about my parenting, twisted interpretations of David's innocent behaviors, and medical opinions from so-called experts who had never even met my son. She actually claimed his stimmying was a sign of abuse, that his meltdowns proved I couldn't control him, that his need for routine was evidence I was stunting his development. It was pure, unadulterated cruelty. But the worst part? How she manipulated David during her supervised visits. She'd deliberately trigger his sensory issues, blasting loud music or dragging him to crowded, overwhelming places, then she'd document his distress, presenting it as proof of my supposed incompetence. She taught him to hide his autism traits, telling him that normal children don't flap their hands or rock back and forth. She actually convinced my sweet boy that if he just tried harder to be normal, maybe people wouldn't look at him like something was wrong. Watching the damage she inflicted on his self-esteem was utterly heartbreaking. Thankfully, my lawyer, Sarah Martinez, was a force of nature. Young, yes, but absolutely fierce. She had a brother with autism, so she truly understood the nightmare we were facing. She helped me meticulously document everything, David's therapy progress, his academic achievements. Because here's the thing, David was gifted. He was reading at a high school level at 7 years old. His deep, special interest in astronomy had led him to actually correspond with professors at the local university. But my mother's lawyers just dismissed all of it, fixating instead on his difficulties with social interaction and sensory processing. The preliminary hearings were brutal. My mother would sit in the courtroom, looking like the picture of a concerned grandmother, all church clothes and perfectly coiffed silver hair. She'd testify about her deep concern for David's welfare, how she just wanted what was best for him. She painted me as this fragile, young widow in denial, struggling to cope. Her voice would crack with fake emotion as she described watching me struggle with his meltdowns in public. Blackwood, her lawyer, was a master at twisting every single thing. David's crucial need for routine? He spun it as my being too rigid and controlling. His advanced vocabulary? Dismissed as mere echolalia, just mimicking words without understanding. His profound knowledge of astronomy? Characterized as an unhealthy obsession that I was encouraging instead of correcting. They even brought in their own expert, Dr. Richard Hoffman, who spent a grand total of 45 minutes with David and concluded he needed intensive behavioral modification in a residential facility. The most devastating moment came during David's court-ordered evaluation with their psychologist. Dr. Hoffman deliberately overwhelmed David with rapid-fire questions, blinding bright lights, and sudden, jarring movements. When David, inevitably, had a meltdown, Hoffman calmly documented it as evidence of severe behavioral issues. The court made me watch the video of that session. I saw my son curled up on the floor, hands clamped over his ears, while this supposed professional took notes like David was a specimen in a lab, not a terrified child. My mother's testimony was calculated cruelty, thinly veiled as grandmotherly concern. She spoke about how David would never be able to live independently, how he would always be a burden on society, how resources were wasted on a child who would never contribute anything meaningful to the world. She even described watching him at family gatherings, sitting alone, and claimed it broke her heart. But what she conveniently omitted was that she was the one who told all the other family members to keep their children away from him, because autism, she said, might be contagious. The custody evaluator, Margaret Foster, seemed completely biased towards my mother from the start. She spent hours interviewing my mother about her concerns, and barely 30 minutes talking to me about David's actual needs and incredible progress. Her report actually recommended that David would benefit from a more structured environment with consistent discipline and clear boundaries, completely ignoring the extensive documentation from David's therapists about his remarkable development in our sensory-friendly home. When it was my turn to testify, I felt like I was fighting for David's very life. I explained how we'd built a safe, sensory-friendly home, how his routines weren't rigidity but a necessary structure that helped him feel secure in an unpredictable world. I talked about his incredible memory, his ability to see patterns others missed, his compassionate heart that broke when he saw others struggling. But Blackwood twisted every single word, making my advocacy for David's needs sound like I was enabling bad behavior. Then came the part one dreaded most: they brought David into court to testify. Judge Karen Phillips had initially resisted, knowing it would be traumatic for such a young child, but Blackwood argued that David's own words were crucial evidence. They set up the courtroom with special lighting and gave David his comfort object, a small telescope his father had given him. My mother's lawyer had coached him relentlessly during their visits, teaching him to describe his meltdowns as moments when he couldn't control himself, when he felt angry and scared. David sat in the witness chair, looking so small in his favorite blue shirt, the one he claimed helped him think better. Judge Phillips spoke to him gently, explaining he just needed to tell the truth about his life with Mommy and with Grandma. David nodded solemnly, his hands fidgeting with his telescope. When asked about living with me, he described our daily routines in precise detail, how we read together every night, how I helped him with his sensory needs, how we worked on his social skills through careful practice. But when Blackwood began his cross-examination, everything changed. He asked David if he ever felt different from other children, if he ever wished he could be normal like them. David's face crumpled. He admitted, yes, sometimes he felt broken. Sometimes he wondered why his brain worked differently than everyone else's. Blackwood pushed harder, asking if David thought it was fair that his mommy had to spend so much time taking care of him instead of having a normal life like other parents. And then my mother's testimony reached its chilling crescendo. She was asked directly about David's future prospects. She looked straight at him, the 7-year-old boy sitting in a chair far too big for him, and delivered the words that will haunt me forever. She said that if she had known David would turn out this way, she would have advised me to terminate the pregnancy. She actually said that society already had too many burdens, too many people who would never be able to contribute anything meaningful. She concluded, with a chilling calm, that some children are mistakes that should be corrected before they can cause more pain. The courtroom went absolutely silent. I watched David's face as his grandmother's words sank in, saw the exact moment he understood she believed he should never have been born. His hands stopped fidgeting with the telescope. He just stared at her, those intelligent dark eyes that looked so much like his father's, completely devoid of emotion. Judge Phillips leaned forward, her expression shifting from professional neutrality to something much sharper, much more dangerous. She asked my mother to repeat what she had just said, to clarify her statement for the court record. My mother, utterly oblivious to the dramatic shift in atmosphere, doubled down. She elaborated, explaining that selective termination was sometimes the kindest option for everyone involved, that children like David would suffer their entire lives, never forming meaningful relationships, never supporting themselves, never experiencing simple joys that normal people took for granted. She spoke about financial burden, emotional toll, and resources that could be better allocated to children with genuine potential. Judge Phillips cut her off mid-sentence. Her voice was ice-cold as she asked my mother if she understood that she was advocating for the elimination of an entire population of human beings based on neurological differences. My mother, still unfazed, responded that she was simply being realistic about quality-of-life issues, that sometimes tough decisions had to be made for the greater good. She then turned back to look at David and added that surely everyone could see he would be better off if his suffering could have been prevented. That's when David stood up in his witness chair. The 7-year-old boy, who struggled with social cues and loud noises, looked his grandmother straight in the eye and said something no one in that courtroom would ever forget. He told her that he wasn't broken, that his brain just worked differently, like how some people need glasses to see and some people need hearing aids to hear. He said his daddy had told him he was special, not because he was autistic, but because he was David, and there would never be another David in the whole universe. David's voice grew stronger, radiating a quiet confidence. He continued, saying he knew more about stars than most grown-ups, that he could remember every conversation he'd ever had, that he noticed things other people missed. He told the court that he had dreams just like everyone else, that he wanted to become an astronomer and maybe discover a new planet someday. He said his mommy helped him practice being around people so he could make friends, and that he was getting better at it every day, even though it was hard work. Then David did something truly stunning. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket, explaining he'd written down some thoughts in case he forgot what he wanted to say. But instead of reading his prepared statement, he started asking his grandmother questions. He wanted to know if she thought Stephen Hawking should never have been born since he couldn't walk or talk normally. He asked about Temple Grandin, who designed better systems for animals because she understood them differently than other people did. The most powerful moment came when David asked his grandmother if she thought his daddy had made a mistake by loving him. His voice wavered slightly as he explained that his daddy had read him bedtime stories every night, had bought him his first telescope, had told him that being different wasn't being wrong. He asked if she thought his daddy was stupid for believing that David could grow up to do important things, for treating him like he mattered, for being proud of him just the way he was. Judge Phillips later said in interviews that she had been on the bench for over 20 years and had never heard a 7-year-old deliver such a clear, logical argument for his own right to exist. David wasn't having a meltdown. He wasn't exhibiting any of the behavioral issues described in the reports. He was calmly, methodically dismantling his grandmother's argument, using examples and reasoning that many adults would struggle to articulate. His advanced vocabulary wasn't echolalia, it was genuine understanding expressed with remarkable clarity. My mother's response? To double down even harder. She told David that she loved him, but that love sometimes meant making difficult choices. She explained that his father had been too sentimental, too unwilling to accept reality. She said David's intelligence just made things worse because he was smart enough to understand how different he was, which would only increase his suffering as he got older. She actually reached toward him as if to pat his head while telling him that he would understand when he was older why this was for the best. That's when Judge Phillips had heard enough. She ordered my mother to step away from David and return to her seat immediately. The judge's voice, carrying absolute authority, addressed the courtroom, stating that she had just witnessed something she had never encountered in her decades of family law practice. She declared that a child had been forced to defend his fundamental right to exist in her courtroom, and that no child should ever be placed in that position by the adults who were supposed to protect him. Judge Phillips continued, explaining that she had listened to hours of testimony about David's limitations, his challenges, his supposed inability to thrive, but she had just heard David himself demonstrate remarkable self-awareness, emotional intelligence, and advocacy skills that would be impressive in someone 3 times his age. She pointedly noted that David had shown more maturity and wisdom in the past 10 minutes than some of the adults who had testified in his case. Then, the judge did something unprecedented. She ordered the court reporter to prepare a complete transcript of David's testimony and my mother's statements. And she announced she would be forwarding copies to the State Bar Association for review of attorney conduct, to the State Licensing Board for review of Dr. Hoffman's evaluation methods, and to the Family Court Administration for review of custody evaluation procedures. She stated that what had happened in her courtroom represented systemic failures that went far beyond this single case. But Judge Phillips wasn't finished. She turned to address my mother directly, her voice carrying 20 years of judicial authority and a palpable personal outrage. She explained that family court was designed to determine the best interests of children, not to provide a platform for eugenics advocacy. She stated that my mother's testimony revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of human worth and dignity that made her unsuitable for any custodial relationship with David or any other child. The custody ruling was swift and decisive. Judge Phillips granted me full legal and physical custody with no visitation rights for my mother. She issued a restraining order preventing my mother from contacting David directly or attempting to interfere with his education or medical care. But more importantly, she ordered that David's testimony be entered into the court's public record as an example of a child's successful self-advocacy, with identifying information redacted to protect his privacy. Within hours of that transcript being released, David's testimony exploded across social media. Legal advocacy groups shared excerpts, disability rights organizations used his words in their campaigns, and autism awareness groups created viral posts featuring his poignant questions about Stephen Hawking in Temple Grandin. The hashtag Minds Different Not Broken started trending, with thousands of people sharing their own stories about neurological differences and the desperate need for societal acceptance. The video of Judge Phillips's powerful response to my mother became a sensation in legal circles. Law schools began using the transcript as a teaching tool for discussing judicial ethics and courtroom management. Family law attorneys started referencing the case in their own arguments about capacity and representation. The Judicial College even invited Judge Phillips to speak at conferences about recognizing and protecting children's rights in family court proceedings. Dr. Hoffman faced a formal investigation by the State Psychology Licensing Board. That quick, 45-minute evaluation that caused David so much distress was reviewed by independent experts who found multiple violations of professional standards for working with autistic children. His license was suspended, pending additional training and supervision. The residential facility he had recommended for David was also investigated and found to have numerous violations of patient rights and treatment protocols. My mother's lawyer, Blackwood, faced disciplinary action from the State Bar Association. His aggressive cross-examination of David was deemed inappropriate and potentially harmful to a child's well-being. Several of his previous cases involving children with disabilities were reviewed, and a clear pattern of similar tactics was discovered. He ultimately lost his license to practice family law and was required to complete extensive training in child psychology and disability rights before ever being allowed to represent clients in cases involving minors again. The custody evaluator, Margaret Foster, was removed from the court's approved list of professionals. Her report on David was found to contain multiple factual errors and biased interpretations that completely ignored documented evidence of his progress and capabilities. The family court implemented new training requirements for all custody evaluators, with specific emphasis on understanding neurodevelopmental differences and avoiding discriminatory assumptions about disability. 3 months after the trial, David and I received an invitation that truly changed our lives. The International Astronomical Union had heard about his testimony and, more importantly, his passion for astronomy. They invited him to participate in a youth program where he would work with professional astronomers on a real research project. David's incredibly detailed observations and pattern recognition skills, enhanced by his autistic traits rather than limited by them, proved invaluable to the team studying variable star formations. That research project led to David co-authoring a paper that was published in a peer-reviewed astronomy journal before his 8th birthday. The media attention that followed focused not on his autism, but on his scientific contributions and his remarkable journey, from a courtroom where his right to exist was questioned, to a laboratory where his unique perspective was celebrated. Universities began reaching out to offer future opportunities, and science museums invited him to share his work with other young astronomers. My mother made one final attempt to contact David through a letter sent to our address 6 months after the trial. In it, she claimed she had only wanted what was best for him, that her words in court had been misunderstood, and that she hoped he would forgive her someday when he was older and could appreciate her concerns. The letter was forwarded to our attorney, who used it as additional evidence for maintaining the restraining order, demonstrating her ongoing refusal to acknowledge the harm she had caused. David read the letter at his own request. Then he asked me to help him write a response. His reply was characteristically direct and logical. He explained that he understood she thought she was helping, but that her help had caused him pain and confusion about his own worth. He told her that he was happy and successful in his current life, that he had friends who accepted his differences, and that he was working on important scientific research. He ended by saying that he hoped someday she would understand that different didn't mean wrong, and that every person deserved the chance to discover their own potential. 5 years later, David's story continues to inspire advocacy and legal reform across the country. His testimony has been cited in dozens of court cases involving children with disabilities, and several states have revised their family law procedures to include specific protections for neurodivergent children. David, now 12, has published 3 more research papers, speaks at astronomy conferences, and mentors other young people with autism who are interested in science careers. Most importantly, he knows, without question, that his mind is different, not broken. And that, truly, is all that matters.